My name is Lindsey Dillon. I'm calling in from Santa Cruz. I'm a associate professor of sociology at UC Santa Cruz. Um, and I had the ISSI grad fellowship. It must have been 2011 to 2013 or something like that. Yeah. With a group of people that some of them I'm still in touch with and I see at conferences. Um, but we all informed each other's work and I their books came out and I see it in the acknowledgments that like we were all just really a part of each other's process, at least getting through that first book. Um, and yeah, I was in the company of some really amazing people who are now doing really amazing stuff. So I'm just like, wow, like that was really cool because these people are rock stars now. Um, and Yeah. So it was yeah, it was overall a great experience. I felt like I got the kind of attention. I Your question was like what was what do I remember about it or
Um, yeah, if you want to walk through like a particular moment or story or memory that stands out, yeah, if there's like one thing or like a couple of memories that like you come back to still.
one of the things I liked about the program is that we became close. 2 years every week is a lot. You get to know people's project as they're struggling through um their process, and we were all at different stages. So I started prior to when I had done my field work, but I got to workshop people's job talks. And then because it's interdisciplinary, um, although all studying social change empirically, through social science, not to say that humanities are kind of speculative projects. That in some ways is more what I gravitate towards now, but we were all working through like the empirics and theorizing up from that. But from different disciplines, and there was no one there in geography. And that was really great to kind of go outside the department. And I think to some extent, every department has its own um, the specialness about it and its own sort of toxicities as a graduate student, or its own dynamics. And to have a space, an intellectual and a social collegial space outside of the department with a group of, eight other committed scholars and three amazing teachers who are so focused on your well-being and your professional growth it was such a gift. So yeah, the financial support was necessary, but the whole process was just so meaningful to me, feeling like I had something to say and had something to offer to others. And so, we would go to the ISSI. Um, I think it must have burned down or something happened, but there's this beautiful wood paneled room at the Troy Duster room where we met, weekly. And yeah, I got to see people's job talks and going on the job market, being a parent, you know, like the beginning of analyzing a project where it's kind of like fuzzy and maybe not great, but like it's just like working at it, and then in retrospect, having seen some people struggle through analyzing their empirics and then the fantastic books that came out of it, it's just such a nice reminder that, it's all kind of messy at the beginning and, everyone it just takes time to work through material, to try things out. And the best thing to have in that process is like a cohort of people to read your work and to kind of be with you in that long haul kind of state. So um, I feel like I learned collegiality at a new level. Like I feel like I had that in geography too, but I also learned it was like a new space. It was outside the department, and I learned how to be kind of a colleague in a new way. And then the feedback and the attention from our teachers was just amazing. And just to know, like, what I should expect from my own advisors and some support there when things were sort of, not as much as I would have wanted, but like, one of the things I feel now about advising, and I think maybe it was partly taught there, is just like one advisor can't be everything. You could never expect that. And, there's like a weird, parent-child relationship dynamic power that gets formed, but you can't expect your advisor, your dissertation chair to be everything for you. So you have a team. And, what I learned too is like part of your team is not just your dissertation committee. It's like, other people who support you. And Christine and David and Deborah were absolutely key to feeling supported. And yeah, it was amazing.
Oh, it's great that you sort of got to both like the experience of the institute directly and also how it really shaped your experience as a grad student.
Yeah.
I'm wondering now you're in your career. I would love to hear a little bit about what you're working on now, what your work looks like now, and how you think it's been influenced by your time at the institute.
I think in terms of shifting into another field, from geography to sociology, in some ways, geography, especially at Berkeley, is interdisciplinary, but like having worked with sociologists or people, sociology adjacent, it made me feel comfortable being more conversant. So I think getting outside of geography and having a close cohort of colleagues, in like the broad social sciences made it probably made it easier for me to switch fields and to feel like I could participate in a different discipline. Um, I mean, I'm kind of like iffy on that because UC Santa Cruz sociology is very heterodox and interdisciplinary. So, but I feel like I was able to kind of find myself in other disciplinary spaces, maybe more easily, which is great, to step out of your own field. And I also feel like it gave me insight into what graduate students that I work with need, being stepping outside of the department, having different forms of support and that professionalization, which, I think I didn't get that from the department. And there is this kind of presumption that you just figure it out. And I think, as a side note, I think this is the case with methods as well. Like, you know, just figure it out. And the professionalization thing, like, we don't need to teach that to you, just figure it out. But I gained so much from professionalization in the broad sense. Like, what should a letter of recommendation look like? What should a job talk look like? What does it mean to be a colleague, in a room of people that it is diverse, in terms of people's interests and their methods and their theories. And so I feel like I learned the value of professionalization, and I don't want to replicate had the way I got from my department was just like figure it out. I'm like, okay, no, graduate students really need like those kinds of seminars, those kinds of spaces, and also to some extent, like finding those relationships that are not me, with the people that I work with, like having like a broad network of support. So entering other spaces. And so I really gained an appreciation for the value of that. And then just in terms of how it supports my own research, um, well, what I thought I was going to be working on now, and what I still might do is a project on emotions in the climate crisis. So, and I may switch projects entirely, but like what I've been thinking about for a couple of years is thinking about how people experience the climate crisis at a more psychological and emotional level, and how that expresses itself through like practices or art, or kind of collective um, practices. And then, part I'm like, okay, well, how do scientists who study the minutia of like coral reef bleaching and know it in some ways it's such a analytical scientific level. Like how do they experience the feelings around that? And I'd noticed that some like scientific institutes have like support groups and stuff like that. So I was kind of interested in that angle. And then also how psychologists have started to address the climate crisis in the space of the clinic, where it tends to be about an individual pathology and individual growth, but like the climate crisis is not something an individual can fix. And so there's that, and like thinking about the connection between like a lot of um, um, people saying during the AIDS crisis, like don't mourn, organize was like a famous phrase. And this idea that like, well, the way to combat grief is through like action. And I'm interested in that, but also like it's become such a common sense refrain now within the climate organizing circles. Like you don't need to have feelings, you need to like do action, do social action to like combat those feelings. And I'm interested in how, I don't know, people broadly have been like thinking about loss of one's future or an expected future, its connection with debt and political economy and difference and all that type of things. So that's been my ideas for my next project. And yeah, in terms of the institute, again, I think I come back to thinking about how it was a gift to watch people work through projects. Um, and to some extent, I got that with my graduate school cohort, but this was in such a structured way. So, um, I think, working through the data collection and the analysis phase and writing up and um, and starting and beginning to start another project, like that can be really daunting. But I think there's a way in which those insights have helped me. I think primarily, I think the ISSI, it helped me feel like a scholar on my own feet, that I could go off into the world. And now, probably the most influence it has is on me as an advisor and thinking about what my grad students need. Um, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. I've been thinking about that a lot recently, as well as I'm looking toward the job market and just how
Mhm.
much more confident I feel, not just in like talking about my work, but in sort of being a scholar as a result of sort of being a part of this cohort.
Yes.
So nice to hear that there's a long tradition of that in the institute. And I just have one more question, and that's if is there a piece of advice that you would like to share with current or future students?
It's just tough because it's such a tough market for jobs and for incoming graduate students now. So I feel like you're doing like my advice is like you're doing good work and you're doing really good work. And to stick to the political commitments and sort of personal passions that brought you to that work and let that be a guide to like what things look like afterwards. And honestly, the tenure track route is nice and it's not. It's it can be golden handcuffs. And what happiness and success looks like is not necessarily that form. And there's a lot of ways to continue doing the work one is doing. One of them looks like a tenure track job. And again, I don't want to discount, how lucky I am to be in my position. I'll take my golden handcuffs to my retirement if I can, if the campus doesn't, burn down or something like that in a fire. Um, but it's also I don't necessarily know that this was like the job that was going to bring me the most happiness. And I think happiness and success, we're trained that happiness and success looks like one thing when we're in, especially a place like Berkeley, where your advisors expect you because you're at the top, you know. So just, more or less, you are at the top and you and others around you have a really good chance of making that tenure track route. Um, But I also think that yeah, success and happiness doesn't necessarily look like that, and one can take everything that one learned into many different kinds of like jobs and um, positions. So I think you probably hear that and think about that with your cohort too. Like, what does success look like to me in this given this climate? And yeah. And it's nice that you are at a position where it is really likely that you're going to get a good tenure track job. But I also think, you know, it's golden handcuffs. And when, it doesn't necessarily give as much freedom as other positions do in intellectual pursuits. It can be, you know, really narrow how you prove your value to the university or to your field. So, so I would say success looks like a lot of different things, and happiness does too.
Um, I yeah, that's great advice and something I feel like we don't necessarily hear enough from our position, as you noted, as grad students at Berkeley. Um, but that's all the questions that I had. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to share, maybe, about the Institute as it's celebrating its anniversary. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is, when I was there periodically, you see the center threaten to like cut funding. And I know they're always going through that. And I just feel like the fact that it reached 50 years and the stability of the program and what it has offered to now generations of students has so much to do with the work of the people at the institute and the teachers there to support the program and to constantly like they're constantly having to prove its relevance and to prove its deserving the funding. So it's not been easy, and I just want to like give credit to that labor of keeping the program afloat and the whole institute. So I see that, and I've seen it over the years too.
Great. I think that's a great note to end on.